Hi there, I'm Steven Reisner. Thanks for joining us this year at Our Future 2024. Today we're going to talk about how to choose the right setup for your aquaponic system based on your crop choices. If you're growing leafy greens, it's going to be different than growing something like a cactus or a cannabis or some other types of herbs, depending on what it is that you're growing. So today we're going to talk about all the different ways that you can set your system up and how to maximize the yields based on the crop choice and what the crop wants to succeed. You can see here on the first page, on the left we have some wonderful tot soy in a raft system. Next up, from left to right, we have a little prickly pear cactus, which was grown from seed in an aquaponic system, which again, people generally don't think of cactuses as water-loving plants, but in fact you can grow just about any type of crop if you set it up properly in aquaponics. We also have a beautiful commercial lettuce system out in California that I used to work with. And then on the right here you have a aquaponic cannabis plant in Oklahoma. A little bit about myself. I'm the founder of Aquaponics. I've been growing aquaponic cannabis legally for the last 12 years, as well as organic certified vegetable farms and living soil facilities, depending on what the a given week has in store, as well as medicinal herbs, fruit trees, any kind of unusual non-lettuce aquaponic system at this point I've worked with or put together. I have also the first aquaponic cannabis plants ever featured in High Times, the first aquaponic cannabis consulting company ever created, consulted on or participated in aquaponic or cannabis farms on every continent except for Antarctica at this point, so I can answer pretty much any question you have on any kind of pest or design issue that comes in just about anywhere on the planet at this point. I've trained staff at the largest aquaponic cannabis facilities in the United States, Africa, Canada, and Asia. I've also am the host of the aquaponic cannabis podcast called Growing with Fishes, which is now on our 8th year as of February. So really exciting on that. We have over 1,000 hours of content on there, which you can check out as well. I was also the first person to legally import cannabis seeds to Zimbabwe for the legal market. Why use aquaponics? Aquaponics is using fish waste or other aquatic animals in order to grow terrestrial plants. Aquaponics uses significantly less supplemental nutrients and about 18% of the water compared to traditional soil growing or drain-to waste systems. Aquaponics is much cheaper to climate control, especially on larger facilities in colder climates, as the water can act as a thermal battery. We'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation. Aquaponics also allows for multiple revenue streams. You can sell mineralized fish waste, you can sell the fish, you can sell the crops, you can also sell the water from the system as well. So it really offers quite a few different ways to monetize your farm as well. Aquaponics also uses significantly more biodiversity than most soil systems, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the presentation as well, which is often surprising to most people. Why use aquaponics? Well, aquaponics is 18% of the water compared to, again, soil systems, which in places like California can be extremely important as they have very tight water restrictions, or Arizona, desert nations, island nations. These can all be huge factors in whether or not you can grow a chosen crop or not. In California, you're only allowed a very small allotted amount of water per cannabis plant, for instance. Anything over that, and you're fined quite heavily. We use 12 to 20% of the supplemental nutrients compared to other soil crops. Again, it varies a little bit by crop, but can again significantly reduce your overhead costs of your farm. Additional revenue streams, fish, mineralized fish waste, inoculated water, and a whole bunch of other things can help pay the bills. Improved secondary metabolite expressions means higher cannabinoids, higher terpenes, higher flavonoids, and higher essential oil compounds in your crops. Anyone that's had an aquaponic lettuce can definitely tell you it tastes better than the hydro bib lettuce that you get from the grocery store, for instance, because it has all those secondary compounds being activated, so you have a much more flavorful lettuce. And then you have uncheatable honesty. The fish are living in the system. If you cheat and put in, a heavy chemical or use a harsh pesticide, you're going to kill all the fish and the system collapses. So there's no way around, doing things the wrong. You have to do it the right way. There's no way to kind of cheat. Major hurdles and challenges that the aquaponics industry faces. Well, you have it can be hard to provide enough potassium, phosphorus, or manganese without harming the fish. How do you address food pathogens in a way that's fish friendly? Things like E. coli or salmonella. How to manage molds and insects and other pathogens in higher humidity environments. How to maximize production per square foot. Maximizing mineralization of fish waste to reduce costs. Soil required to maximize essential oil levels for certain crops as well, or even to even grow them at all in cases of like OSHA root and other things like that. And then how to manage crop rotation and maximize yields. So what can the aquaponics industry learn from the cannabis industry? Well, it definitely makes sense to propose legislation before the industry regulates you. You see this a lot in cannabis where they've created white lists of inputs or pesticides. This allows easy compliance as well as easy time for the regulators to kind of put forth and propose these things as well. The aquaponics industry very much could use that type of model to help fend off some future legislation that I'm sure is coming. Create info packets and informative videos to help educate lawmakers. Again, this is something that the cannabis industry does regularly in order to help get what they want. It's something that I think the aquaponics industry definitely could learn from. Propose white lists and best practices instead of black lists. Again, it makes it much more easier for compliance. Propose white lists for pesticides, which are, again, heavily used in the cannabis industry to ensure that everyone's producing healthy crops. We could do the same thing with the aquaponics industry. And then propose white lists for minerals as well, again, mainly to avoid heavy metals, and this comes into a factor with things like kelp in particular, where a lot of people think that kelp can be used extremely safely at kind of any dosage rate, which simply isn't the case. And we've seen multiple farms fail for things like arsenic and other heavy metals after thinking that all things organic are organic, in every way, and they simply are not. So let's talk a little bit about the biology of aquaponics versus soil. There's a wonderful paper that was put out called Aquaponic Systems Utilize the Soil Food Web to Grow Healthy Crops by Brian Flipowicz and a whole bunch of other awesome people that were part of the Aquaponics Association. Every few years, the soil purists come out and try to ban aquaponics as an organic production method, and every time we have to go in and smash them with a giant hammer because they have no idea what they're talking about. As you can see in our study here in 2017, the soilless aquaponics system, on average, had 168% more biodiversity in the aquaponics system versus even the most diverse soil system. So you have 168% more different types of microbes living in the root system compared to a terrestrial system. So that immediately blows out of the water any argument that it's not organic. It's even more organic than almost everyone else's terrestrial soil beds are. And that's, quantifiable in every way. The most diverse microbiology was aquaponic systems. The next diverse was organic hydro. The least diverse was the soil systems that were tested. So again, not what you'd necessarily think off the bat, but it is absolutely why aquaponics continues to maintain its organic certification ability in the United States, mainly through Oregon Tilth as the certifier. The proper mapping of aquatic nutrient web microbes has only been really seriously done the last couple of years. You have people like Matt Powers and a couple of others that are kind of sequencing some of these different things out there that can help us better understand what's going on. Matt's done a ton of awesome work with soil samples and all kinds of other things, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do down this space as well. The NASA study, again, there was a separate study that I was part of with Ouroboros originally, and they tested over 50 different aquaponics farms as well as some aquaculture farms. All of those farms had different aquatic food webs in order to survive, so they had different microbes playing different roles for mineralization and chelation. The only two that were even close were an aquaponics facility across from a koi farm. All the other ones were radically different in terms of which species are playing those roles. So you have this incredible biodiversity across aquatic microbes that simply isn't present in terrestrial microbes. In terrestrial microbiology and soil, you in general have the same types of groups of microbes playing the same roles much more often than you do in aquatics, where it just varies completely. and it's not even close. So something else that's kind of very intriguing when it comes to studying the aquatic side of things on the microbes. So aquaponics versus living soil. Aquaponics has higher terpene levels, fast growth, slightly higher learning curve, fewer pest control options, cheaper climate control costs, multiple revenue streams, can feed a local community as well as medicate them, and much more water efficient. Living soil has high terpene levels as well, but often not as high as aquaponics. Slow growth, and compared to aquaponics, you're looking at half or less of the growth speed. Slightly more forgiving than aquaponics. You can definitely screw an aquaponic system up a little faster. You do have more pest control options with living soil because you don't have to worry about killing all the aquatic microbes the same way you do with an aquaponic system. You have more expensive climate control costs because you don't have the thermal battery capacity of the water volume. You have fewer revenue streams, and you have no additional food production. With our aquaponic systems, you're getting meat and plants. With living soil, you're just getting plants. So that's something else to consider when you're trying to maximize your per square foot, especially things like homesteads. Aquaponics versus hydroponics. You have microbes deliver your nutrients to your plants with aquaponics. You have much lower nutrient ppm ranges that are required due to the higher bioavailability of aquaponics, thanks to all those wonderful microbes. You have lower overhead costs because, again, are able to recirculate everything, so you have lower water costs, lower nutrient costs, as well as lower climate control costs. And you have higher terpene levels expression compared to hydroponics because those microbes are activating those genes in the root system of those plants. Compared to hydroponics, which doesn't have microbes to assist uptake, requires much higher nutrient ppms, is much more susceptible to disease and pathogens because the plants have no base immunity to anything, and uses 4 to 5 times as much water for a less nutrient rich and less essential oil rich crop production. Things to consider: do you have enough power? Do you have single phase or 3-phase power? Do you have tent room or greenhouses? Is there water access near your grow? Do you have an HOA that's going to be a huge pain in your butt if you decide to put a greenhouse up in your backyard, as seen here in the diagram? Do you have adequate access to fresh air at the grow site? And what permits, if any, are needed for your build? In Oklahoma, we don't have to pull anything as long as we're not incorporated. But if you're in New Jersey, you're going to be, pulling 180 different permits just to put up a small greenhouse. Crop choices and design. This is what really comes into play in terms of maximizing your crop or even growing some crops at all. And today we're going to talk about wicking beds, media beds, raft beds, vertical tower systems, dual root zone pots, and tree drums. Nutrient requirements. Are you going to grow a low nutrient density system or a high nutrient density system? Are you growing fruiting crops or leafy greens? All of these things are things that must be determined before you go ahead and build your system in order to properly get the right yields and the best return on your investment. Soil to increase flavor and woody crops. So soil is critical for many different crops. Things like osha root won't grow at all without it. Fruit trees, for instance, most fruit trees require mycorrhizal fungi in order to properly fruit and flower. So many different crops require these root symbiotes in order to properly complete their life cycle. And that's why it's super important to not consider aquaponics as a soilless medium only. I know in the early days that's what was often taught. We now understand the importance of it and why you would need that. For instance, there's lots of people that try to grow aquaponic cannabis without soil. They're never hitting anything above 3% terpene levels. If you want to hit 4, 5, 6% terpenes and get maximum dollar for your cannabis pounds, you absolutely have to have terrestrial microbes in some layer of soil in that root system, or you simply are the plant's incapable of hitting those numbers without it. So, it's a really great example of why. Same thing with fruit trees. You're simply not going to get a lot of fruit trees to fruit at all without a soil layer. So, this is stuff that really is important. Things like osha root, wasabi, and others, have to have a thin soil layer, or even in the case of osha root, a deep soil layer in order to get proper yields in a captive environment. And I was the first person to commercially produce medicinal osha root in an aquaponics facility back in 2014 or 2015. So Definitely another one of those high-value medicinal crops that you can grow in aquaponics that you really can't grow with hydroponics or living soil. Almost all OSHA currently is wild harvested. The nutrient profiles, you can grow a low nutrient requirement crop or system or a high nutrient requirement crop system. Does your crop require mycorrhizal to grow properly? Does it require even root pressure in order to develop properly? Things like potatoes, for instance, have to have an even soil pressure around them if they're going to grow properly. Many root crops, carrots would be another one that will get very deformed if you don't have even pressure all the way around the roots. So definitely something to consider. And then are you doing a heavy feeding crop or fruiting crop? Because those are going to also require their own separate things. First up, we're going to talk about rafts. So rafts have a lot of different pros and cons. First off, they're great for low nutrient crops. Anything you're going to grow kind of less than 2 or 3 months. Really, rafts are probably going to be the best way to go. They generally have lower nutrient requirements if they're going to grow that quickly. Things like chamomile, lettuce, other things like that. Leafy greens, spinach. Most plants that grow extremely fast, raft beds again are going to be your best way to go about it. Great way to plant high plant density. If you're going to get the maximum per square foot, it can definitely be a good way. And also, we're really good for colder climates because you're going to get that, again, thermal battery aspect of it. Many plants hate to have their roots fully submerged, so it won't work for everything. There's no medium for mycelium or terrestrial microbes or to supplement the system on an individual plant basis. It does not allow additional supplementation, and you can't grow root crops, for instance, because it's just simply too wet. The troughs can be a great way to, again, like we talked about, increase your thermal battery, so you can run heat exchangers in the raft beds to help greatly increase the temperature of your facility, especially come wintertime. You hook a gas heater up or a solar water heater up to that, and you're going to get a lot of thermal gain from those raft beds. Places like Canada or Sweden or Norway, this is going to be the best way to kind of climate control that greenhouse in the colder months. Proper aeration is also extremely important with raft beds. Every 3 to 4 feet you need to have an extra oxygen in the form of air stones or other aeration in order to make sure your dissolved oxygen is high enough in the raft beds, especially on larger systems. That can be more of a problem than on smaller systems. And then raft systems, again, can, like we talked about in the past, help with your climate control. So here's an example of a couple of different raft systems. You can see the rows of styrofoam floating beds on the troughs. Works quite well. Plus, you can put the young plants in one end and then harvest at the other, and just kind of shove the whole row down as they harvest. And you always plant on the same side and always harvest at the same side. It can make life a lot easier for your workflow. So wicking beds are sub-irrigated planters. So wicking beds are great for root crops, like we talked about. OSHA root loves wicking beds. Other root crops like potatoes, beets, carrots all grow extremely well in wicking beds. You can also do things that require very specific moisture levels by how deep or shallow you plant those soil beds. Great for crops that require mycelium as well. Many water-loving, marsh-type crops can really grow well. Taro is another one that was going to do really well in this type of setup. Can be slightly more costly than other methods due to the addition of soil. Some plants really hate the constant moisture and lack of airflow, and it can harbor insects a little bit easier. You can see here's some just cloth pots that we stuck in a shallow flood and drain bed. You can see these are some young beets, carrots, and radishes. And then you can see here's an example of some bigger beds and some carrots that we've grown in aquaponics as well from that same bed later on. And then here's some flood and drain beds. You can see with the overflows at the bottom. These have media in the bottom with a layer of burlap or other root permeable weed cloth, and then the soil on top. And then you can see here they each have a little pipe. That's so you can fill it directly to the bottom without getting the surface soil wet. If you're going to put them outside, you really do need to put these extra overflows on them so that when it rains, they don't completely fill up with water and overflow. Nutrient film technique. Now this is another good method if you're trying to maximize essential oil production, because in the NFTs you can remove the plants and then root prune them. The act of root pruning actually will increase secondary metabolites because the plant thinks it's under attack by insects or being fed on by something, so it produces more essential oils in order to kind of defend itself from these different, perceived threats that it has. It makes a great use of space. You can run them along the wall or in places that you wouldn't otherwise use for cultivation. Allows for really high gas exchange and fast growth. Great for clones and aeroponic starts. The downside is, your plants can't get very big. If the plant's roots get too large, they clog the pipes, and it can cause all manner of different issues from water leaks to root rot. And then they also tend to get more root rot because they have lower airflow, and the temperature can get very hot inside of it. So if you have hot water in there with no airflow, it tends to breed pythium and root rot a little bit quicker than other methods, which can be easily mitigated with lactobacillus without too much of a problem. Here you can see some lavender, peppers, mint, and a couple of other crops that are growing in NFTs. Tree drums. Now, tree drums allow you to grow things like fruit trees or other extremely long-lived plants in a way that allows for all their needs to be met. Lemon trees, peach trees, cherry trees all do very well with this method. It's kind of like a dual root zone setup if you're familiar with that, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, except we do about 2/3 layer of soil and 1/3 flood and drain instead of 50-50. Can take up a lot of space on the downsides, and then can decline quickly if the plumbing fails and it's not noticed in time. The trees tend to be much more sensitive than other things, and not quite as tolerant to the roots being tampered with, and can be slightly costly as well. And you can see here our lemon tree we had in Colorado. And you can see here is the diagram. Now this one we did 50-50. Nowadays, again, we do more of a, depending on the tree. Some of them like to do 50-50 if you want to grow a little bit faster. But in general, we now do about a 2/3 to 1/3. So about 1/3 of the hydrogen to 2/3 of the soil. And then we just use a standard flood and drain kit, which you can see here, along with a media guard, which is what's sitting in this exact pot here. Vertical towers. Now these allow great use of space, especially above aquariums or other out-of-the-way places that you don't necessarily have room to put a grow bed. Plants grow extremely quickly this way, especially for things like tomatoes. They can also kind of be self-topping and help with increasing branching and overall production. Root crops can't grow in them. On the downsides, large plants can tend to be pretty unmanageable or hard to physically support, and then some crops just don't grow particularly well in the vertical towers. And you can see here is a couple different examples. You have everything from the 3-inch ones on the left. You have a side-by-side here of a zip grow versus the design that I grew. We were growing 14 heads of lettuce per 5 vertical feet. Your standard zip grow only grows about 6 to 8, so we were able to get significantly more lettuce heads per 5 vertical feet. And you can see here we have tomatoes growing in a 4-inch diameter vertical tower along with the lattice set up there on the aquarium. And this is one of my favorite ways to use, above the aquarium space in order to grow as well, which people often don't do in aquaponics. Next up, we have flood and drain media beds. We're going to talk about a couple different ways to do that. So I generally don't like to use timer-based systems because timers fail. I'd much rather use physics, so I'd rather use bell siphons or loop siphons as they don't fail. I know a lot of people get frustrated with them, and it's generally because a lot of the designs that are put out there on YouTube are just bad, and people aren't educated on how it works. The very first person to invent the bell siphon was Pythagoras, all the way back in the ancient Greek days. He had a thing called the greed cup, which basically had a bell siphon built into the stem, and if you overfilled it, it would drain the contents of your glass all the way out of the bottom of the glass. So if you put too much wine in your glass, it would empty your glass for you and kind of make you look embarrassed. So that's where this design actually originally came from. Now, we use a bell siphon in order to allow this to flood and drain without a timer, and allow it to work continuously as long as the flow rate stays roughly the same on the incoming side of the bed. So ensuring that you have a valve for your water in for your grow bed is extremely important so that you can adjust the flow rate. If the water is constantly running all the way at the bottom of the bell siphon, it means it's not fast enough to properly trigger the bell. If it's completely flooded, it means it's running too fast and that you're overflowing the bell. So very easy to troubleshoot. The other thing that people do wrong with bell siphons is they don't have these 290s, which you can see in the diagram here. If you don't have those 290s, you can't create the water plug that actually starts the siphon. So you have to have those 290s after the bell, and if you have too long of a horizontal run without enough of a drop, it can also cause that plug to not form or to not break. So those are kind of the different ways that people get frustrated with them, but with a little bit of proper design, it really is not an issue at all. The other option you have is loop siphons, which are cool because you can do gigantic beds with loop siphons. You can do 100 square foot, 200 square foot beds with loop siphons, whereas you can't really do much above about 54 square feet with bell siphons, at least with a 1-inch drain. So this can allow you to tie multiple beds together. It can allow you to, put the bell or the drain on the outside of the bed in order to maximize the square footage of grow space inside of a grow bed. They also can be a little bit easier to adjust. You can see here just by putting the valve on the loop, you're good to go. And just remember the top of the loop is where your drain level is going to be. So that's going to be your water level at the top of the loop. And they're very reliable and just easy to assemble. And there's a couple different designs for loop siphons you can find online. Here's another example of another type of loop siphon, not any very much different than the other one. You can see again goes about halfway up that grow bed in order to allow that to trigger. Here's a great example of some more flood and drain beds. These ones are all running loop siphons in Marty Waddell's greenhouse out there in Oregon. Him and I teach the aquaponic cannabis class together. And these are by far the best for long-running crops. If I'm going to grow fruit trees in a non-barrel system, if I'm going to grow bushes, shrubs, herbs, anything that's going to live a long, long time, cannabis, peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, anything that you're going to want to power feed or increase the fruiting ability of these crops and kind of maximize yields. Cucumbers, is another good example. This is really the best way to go about it. The media houses all your microbes. That's where all of your living microbes are going to be. They break down the fish waste and provide all the different wonderful, parts per million of all the different nutrients that the plants are going to need. And then it also allows a good anchor. If I have high winds on a grow bed outside, the media is going to help anchor that plant and keep it from flopping over. Whereas if I have it in a raft bed, that plant is going to flop right over. So it's another great advantage to having the media bed, especially for larger type plants, because it's going to give it a good strong anchor to keep from flopping over in those various wind conditions and thunderstorms that you're going to get over the grow season. Lava rock is kind of the cheapest option. Most lava rock is pH neutral, and it can be extremely cheap. Most lava rock is $210 to $300 per super sack. Compared to hydrogen, which is going to be, well over $1,000 for that same amount. Dual root zone setup, so the key to, growing any type of high nutrient required crop. You can see here we have a terrestrial soil on the upper half, separated by a layer of burlap or other root permeable cloth, and then the media at the bottom in order to allow it to flood and drain. And this allows us to have the full terrestrial microbiome in the top half and the aquatic microbiome in the bottom half. So we're kind of getting double the number of microbes of even a plain Jane aquaponic system. So we're at 200 to 300% of the microbe diversity of a traditional soil system alone in terms of total species. This also allows the plants to have a supercharged immune system. The plant can, know and develop different resistances to a much wider range of pests and pathogens. When we do a dual root zone planting, we extremely rarely ever have any mold issues because the terrestrial microbes and the mycorrhizal fungi stimulate the mold resistance in the plant, so we simply don't run into these issues. Root rot also is a non-issue as well. This also eliminates the need for expensive decoupled systems, which add greatly to the complexity and overall cost and monthly maintenance costs of aquaponic systems. I know they're often pushed for higher nutrient crops, but they also almost double your overhead costs per year. So it just is not financially feasible, and you don't need to. You can very easily do dual root zone plants and completely eliminate the need to have a decoupled system at all, which makes it much, much more easier to manage and cheaper to run. Here's how high you want your water level to be for flood and drain. You don't want the water to touch the soil. We're not trying to make a wicking bed. We're trying to make a flood and drain action in the lower half. Now, what does this do? Well, it allows, when the water goes down, it drafts fresh air into the soil system, bringing in fresh oxygen and allowing the high rate of gas exchange in the upper half and lower half of the root system. And when that water floods back up, it pushes all that air up from those microbes that had just breathed and had a gas exchange and pushes it back out of the pot. So it acts like a diaphragm and almost like a lung action to increase the speed of growth on your crops. Here's a great example of some of the first trials we ever did with dual root zone planting. The tomato on the left had 42% more flower sites than the one without the soil, and it had 38% more harvested tomatoes during this trial. So we were able to increase our yields by 38% with no additional supplementation whatsoever in that soil system, strictly by having a terrestrial soil zone. We were able to increase flowering sites by 42% and total fruit yield by 38%. Again, without any supplemental nutrients. And here's an example of those root systems in a side-by-side comparison. As you can see, the top one was in the media bed alone, had a very small root system, didn't need to create enormous root systems because it had immediate access to the water, versus the terrestrial soil system, which made an enormous root system, which was able to absorb significantly more nutrients per day and account for that huge increase in yield. Because of those terrestrial microbes being present, it changed the expression of those root genes that made the roots just grow much, much larger. Here's a great example of a pumpkin we grew in California, in a dual root zone pot. We were able to grow quite a large, giant pumpkin right in the middle of a raft bed, or a media bed. So definitely something that kind of shows the different extremes of plants that you can grow. Because again, typically people don't think of this type of stuff as something you can grow in aquaponics, and you can dial them in for anything with dual root zones. You can make an acidic soil if you want to grow, raspberries or blueberries, or you have a particular type of tree that you want to grow and it needs a specific, high calcium upper root system. You can absolutely dial that soil system in to that, and then still have it feed off of the same system that's feeding your lettuce and everything else in your farm or in your homestead. Here's a great example of a giant cabbage that we grew in Colorado. And again, in a dual root zone system. One of the other things you see often is that you don't need to supplement aquaponics. You absolutely need to supplement aquaponics. Aquaponics has many different chemistry things aspects that force you to supplement. So iron gets oxidized because of the oxygen. Manganese gets oxidized because of the oxygen. Molybdenum gets depleted in aquaponic systems over time because the higher nitrate levels require the more molybdenum or selenium to convert that nitrate back to plant usable nitrogen. So if you don't do that, you'll have results that look like this. On the left is a facility that I was managing while I was there. After I left, they had another guy take over the management. He decided he wanted to go with a new aquaponics consultant because it had been a while since I'd been out there. And they lost my phone number or whatever. They hired another aquaponics company that told them, oh, you don't need to supplement, don't listen to any of the SOPs that had been put together, and decided to go with a quote-unquote formulated fish food, which I'm sure you've seen on the market before, that provides all the nutrients that your aquaponics system needs. Well, that is absolutely not the case. As you can see here on the right, they had a huge amount of nutrient problems. The whole system got unbalanced, and they lost most of the fish and most of the crops because, again, they simply stopped supplementing the system and tried to rely on fish food alone, which again simply does not work for any type of crop, especially heavy feeding crops. So just a good side-by-side of the same facility that I later on got called to, again, once re-clean up after they had completely crashed the system. Here's another great example of supplemented versus unsupplemented. So in the back there, we supplemented 15% additional nutrients on top of in the soil layer compared to just aquaponics alone, which you can see here in the front. Now, you can see we still got a harvestable cannabis in the front, and it's still smokable, but it's about a quarter the yield of the plants in the back. And I don't know about you, but if I was growing this for money, I'd want that row in the back and not the row in the front. And you can see here some side-by-sides of some of those individual nugs as well. You can see here fully developed crops on the left-hand side. They have buds all the way up the stalks versus the ones here on the right where you can see bare stalks, and there's very clearly deficiencies going on because there was, again, just fish waste and nothing else. And you absolutely can get to harvest, but just because you got a plant to finish its life cycle doesn't mean that it had anything close to optimal grow conditions. It's one of the things that's very frustrating when you're trying to teach people aquaponics is you have so many aqua shysters out there that try to tell people they don't need to do anything but feed the fish, and again, that's simply not true. Fish waste was not engineered specifically to feed terrestrial plants. That's just not how it works. So that is something you absolutely have to address on a regular basis. Some additional considerations for large facility design. Now, these are the three main designs that I like to use, and we're going to cover that kind of as the best way practices when you're doing really large-scale aquaponics farms. So you have closed multi-loop, which is, in my opinion, the best way to go about it because it gives you the most control. But if you're in a place like Africa or Thailand, that's not going to make sense because of the infrastructure, and we're going to talk about that. And some other designs like flooded field and pond and track, which can be much, much better for those types of facilities. We can maximize water usage per day by using these methods. We can and make sure that we're not using anything more than we need. We can also ensure that we have water availability year-round. If you're a place like Barbados, you only have what falls from the sky because there are no real aquifers there, or the Bahamas, right? You don't have any fresh water, so you have to use just what the rainwater has. And by utilizing aquaponics, we can utilize significantly less water than our soil growing neighbors. So closed multi-loop. Now, closed multi-loop is similar to a decoupled, except we're going to use single closed loops that can be rerouted or combined at any point in time. So think of it as having multiple single loops that can be rerouted the same way that a decoupled system can. So for instance, each of these fish tanks here going to each individual solid separator can go to any one of 3 different greenhouse bays in this particular facility in Oklahoma. This allows us to have, for instance, 2 or 3 grow beds or fish tanks hooked up if I'm vegging the plants and I just want them to grow quickly, or if I'm in flower and I want to reduce the nitrogen levels without totally unbalancing the system, I can cut that down to 1 or 0 fish tanks and still have it fully recirculating with the nutrients that are still in the system. And it can also be great because if you want to decouple one and run it hydro or something like that for whatever reason, it gives you that instant flexibility without having to necessarily drain the system or get real screwy with the plumbing. A couple of valves and you're off to the races. So really, in my opinion, is the best way to go, and it gives you the absolute most control over your facility at any one time. If I have a tree fall down on one of my greenhouses, I can just shut off that one greenhouse bay and keep everything else still online and circulating without having to rebalance all of my flow rates for my bell siphons or other things. You can also see here on the right hand side, you can see 3 different fill lines. That's the water coming back from those 3 different greenhouses, so we can kind of dial those into whatever makes the most sense. So here's the design blueprint for that facility. As you can see here, there's 3 separate greenhouse bays along with a nursery, the drying shipping containers, and the fish house, which contains all the fish and the filtration for that, as well as the mineralization tanks and mineral storage tanks. And here's that facility completely built out right before we filled it up with another round of cannabis. So it works extremely well, yeah, as you can see here, that leads to really good results. Okay, next up we have flooded field. Now this is really good for places like Africa or places that don't have the infrastructure to really put in a facility like I just showed you. The facility I just showed you requires a decent amount of power, and you are going to have access to a reasonable amount of building materials. If you don't have that, for instance, if you're in Kenya or Zimbabwe, this type of design can be much better. The other cool thing about flooded fields is you can scale this to multiple acres. The example we're going to show you is about half an acre, but you can really scale this to anything, 4 or 5, 6 acres if you wanted to, as long as you just simply scaled the design correctly. This also can work really, really well on solar pumps. There's many different solar well pumps out there that can work really, really well for this type of design. And not require any kind of grid connection, which again can be a huge problem for typical aquaponic systems. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a deeply dug pond. You're going to have a berm to separate your grow beds, usually with a solar panel or two on top, and that runs down to your pump. And then you're going to flood and drain, a 2-foot or 3-foot deep gigantic trough that you're going to put down a huge water liner in. And that's going to be your flooded field that you're going to walk across. This is if you were making a 4x2 grow bed for your backyard, except you're going to make it, a 400 feet by 200 feet grow bed. And when it's not flooded, you can walk right across it as if it's dry dirt. If it's flooded, you're going to sink right to the bottom, so don't do that. The one downside is this doesn't work well for fruit trees because they tend to get pretty tall and the weight of them can make them sink. But if you're doing anything else, this works extremely well. Tomatoes, lettuce, peppers, corn. You can do field crops even with this methodology and it works just fine. And here's that example built out completely in Kenya. You can see here Bob is a good friend of mine. I work with him in Oklahoma. You can see him there on the edge of the berm there, where the flooded field meets the fish tank there. So great design when you're getting to, if you're doing NGO work or missionary work or things like that. This is really going to be kind of your easiest design to make something that's truly at large scale for a low cost, especially if you're disconnected from the grid. Now, pond and track. Now, this is the other method that I like to use. This is a design that I recently used in Thailand last year, and it works extremely well. They have rice fields, and in rice fields, you tend to also have some deeper troughs that are kind of used as storage for the dry season. So we had 4 million gallon storage ponds that were about 35, 40 feet deep that we were able to utilize to get us through the dry season for all of our facilities. So basically, it's similar to the last design that we showed you, except we're using flood and drain tracks, kind of like the decoupled or the coupled multi-loop like we showed you in the beginning of this section, except we're utilizing, it's almost like a hybrid of the two methods. This allows you to have media beds, raft beds, or any number of different types of systems all incorporated into one, or you can set it up as just a wicking bed type setup, and which is what we did here in order to just maximize square footage. So you can see here the beds get flooded with a few inches of water, and then once everything has had about 15 minutes to soak, then we pull the drains on them, and that runs back down to our pond here, which you can see in the pictures. And it works extremely well when you're trying to grow, things like cannabis or something else that's going to be a little bit more heavily affected by pests, and it still allows you to have them in those greenhouse buildings while still not having a huge amount of additional infrastructure. And again, this was just run off of a gas-powered pump. We'd fire it up a few times a day, and it would flood these guys, maybe once a day to flood them. And then, by the time it dries back out at the end of the next day, it's ready to get flooded again. So it works quite well. So recirculating versus decoupled. So fully recirculating systems are cheaper to run, they're easier to build, way less overhead, way less chance of things going wrong, way less money in minerals because you're not having to dose two separate systems. You're only dosing one system. And they're much more stable. You don't have these bouncy pH issues and some of the other screwy stuff that you have with decoupled. Decoupled are more expensive. Significantly more hardware is required. They're much harder to balance the nutrients. They double the number of failure points because you have significantly more pieces of equipment that can go wrong. They're harder to manage, and they use almost double the amount of water per year, kind of defeating the whole point of having an aquaponic system. So if you're going to do that, you might as well just go to hydro at that point. So bell siphons versus timers versus indexing valves. Bell siphons and loop siphons really are the best way to go. They're the most reliable. Unless physics changes, you're not going to have any difference as long as your flow rate stays the same inside the beds, short of you having a clog. Plants don't die if the bell siphon fails. You're still going to have some amount of water in there with a loop siphon or bell siphon, so the plants never really dry out, even in the event of an equipment failure on the siphon itself. It can be a little bit tricky to get them dialed in the beginning. You do have to adjust the flow rates in that first week or so to get everything balanced out. But once you do, you just put a Sharpie line on all the valves so that if you need to open them or close them, you can immediately reset them back to their reset point. And then allows the pumps to run continuously with a bell siphon or loop siphon, which again is much better on the pump's overall length. A good pump can last you 4 to 8 years if you're properly maintaining it versus timers, which are going to blow that pump up in 2 to 5 years because of the wear and tear of turning that pump off and on so many times. Timers over double the number of failure points. The timer can fail or the pump can fail, and 9 times out of 10 the timer is what fails. If you do a timer system, make sure that you're replacing it every year. Now what I like to do is just replace it every December. They always have them on sale for the Christmas lights and stuff, so just buy a new one then if you're going to go with a timer-based system. Don't wait on it to fail because you're going to have a problem. You're going to lose all your plants. Just replace it once a year to make sure that you don't have that issue. Easier to set up for beginners. You can get a flood and drain kit from any hydro store or even garden center these days, especially with how legal cannabis has become. Those little kits are pretty cheap, and you can even build one at Home Depot for about $50, all said and done between the pump and the parts you need. So it can be a cheap way to do it. And then indexing valves have significantly more failure points. There's only one company out there that uses them at all, and they constantly have huge problems with them. That's why you don't really see their systems out there very much in the real world. And they're extremely expensive. You're looking at, quadruple or more the price of a system if you're running indexing valves. The one benefit to using indexing valves, and the only time I've really used them, was in Barbados and Jamaica because we have limited water and we can run 4 times the number of grow beds on this very small amount of water. The downside is they have moving parts, right? So they can break as well, and if they break, now you just lost an entire greenhouse bay instead of losing, a couple of plants like you would at the bell siphon, if that, where you still have water in the bottom of the bed. So it really is a more of a gamble, but if you're in an extreme water environment and you have a very finite amount of water as a resource, it can be a way to grow, 4 rows with one set of water instead of one, because the water will flood one bed and then shut off, flood the next bed, then shut off, flood the next bed, then shut off, flood the next bed, then shut off. So it can allow for that better utilization of water and overall reduced crop cost because you're only mineralizing that smaller volume versus having to mineralize like a DWC bed, which has that huge volume, things like iron, for instance. Media beds versus DWC versus wicking beds versus dual root sends. Media beds lack additional nutrient input, so they're good for some things, but bad if you want to supplement or really push production. DWC has a lack of, again, same issue with lack of nutrient input possibilities, and many different cultivars hate DWC, everything from peppers, tomatoes, or cannabis. We've had a lot of different types of crops that just, for whatever reason, that variety just hated DWC compared to the other methods, whereas wicking beds and media beds, you're almost never going to have those issues. Wicking beds, you can supplement to a lesser extent or even adjust the pH, but they still have issues, especially with later in the season. as the airflow gets lower in them, you can have more root problems. And then dual root zones allow you to supplement and have the most amount of control, both with your microbes and your supplementation. Avoid decoupled indexing valves, vertical methods, and magic sand systems. I'm not a fan of IAVS. IAVS sand systems do not work. They've never been proven, and no one's ever released a parts per million nutrient test for one. So they're kind of a scam system that's out there that most of the time people just end up wasting a bunch of time, money, and resources on, and they don't work ever. So definitely something to avoid. That is often pushed by a couple of loud morons. Okay, fish food's role in nutrients. Now, the higher the protein content of your fish feed, the higher the nitrogen. So if I'm feeding piranhas meat scraps, I'm going to get really high nitrogen levels versus if I'm feeding koi or paku and giving them plant material or peas or things like that. So keep that in mind if you're doing larger setups. Have carnivores for your veg plants or your greens, and then your fruiting crops, you want to have more herbivores or omnivores in order to properly balance your nutrients from the fish waste coming out. There's a lot more to it than this, but this is kind of a short overview and kind of like a this or that kind of thing to compare your different, so you can better match your fish choices with your crop choices. So good fish species to use are tilapia, koi, goldfish, paku, plecostomuses. As you can see on the top right, the zebra ones go for $400 a pop for the babies. You can breed them readily in your systems. You can also, if you're having algae issues in your fish tanks, look on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace for plecostomuses that need new homes. Go to your local pet shop and ask them for the giant monster fish that they keep getting phone calls about that they needs to get rehomed. Plenty of pet stores have locals around that have fish that are way too big for their aquariums. You can very easily take advantage of that and put them to work and stop those freeloading fish from living off of the public dime. Yellow perch can be extremely good for raising. Just remember they like to fit anything they can in their mouth, so keep that in mind when you're choosing tank mates. Catfish can be another one that has a good marketability. Arapaima are another one that is extremely good for resale value. They can resell for thousands of dollars. Same thing with many of the fancy arowanas. Sway is another one, often sold in pet stores as iridescent sharks. It's also sold at your grocery store as sway. So people don't realize a lot of the stuff at your grocery store even is stuff that's at your local pet store. You're just not used to seeing them as large in an aquarium size. Bluegill and sunfish have a really good marketability, and they're probably the best marketability to ease of raising ratio of all of your food fish. And then as far as stuff you shouldn't use, trout, salmon, striped bass, none of those do very well in captivity with the potassium levels that we need for plant growth. So they all have, because they all can go from saltwater to freshwater or have a mechanism to adjust for that, they tend to absorb potassium too much into the bloodstream, which causes heart issues or other organ issues. Ornamental shrimp can be great for leafy green systems only. Under your DWC rafts, like the crystal shrimp or cherry shrimp, can be extremely good and a good revenue stream, if you want to supplement your income. Edible shrimps and prawns don't do particularly well. Again, the higher potassium levels kind of kill them off pretty easily. Tropical fish tend to be super fragile, and crayfish tend to eat your fish, so keep those in mind. Solids waste filters. So typically we almost always use radial flow filters. They really are the best way to go and provide the best and easiest way to reseparate that fish waste later on. Other options include swirl filters and mechanical filters. I'm not a fan of drum filters. They use way too much water. You're going to end up most townships have aquaculture waste rules, so you can't just dump that water anywhere. So by utilizing radial flows, we don't end up with anywhere near as much bywater that we have to dispose of compared to mechanical filters like drum filters, which can be a huge problem, especially in places like California where they really love to fine you if you get caught doing it wrong. Separate filter is not needed for small systems. If anything under like 125 gallons, 150 gallons. You don't need any of this stuff. You have enough square footage in your media beds and stuff like that on a small aquarium type system or something like that to properly filter all of your stuff, unless you're really overfeeding your fish. Mineralization. So mineralization is the process of taking that concentrated fish waste and basically composting it into a much more mineralized aquatic solution. So we take that fish waste and we brew it like you would compost tea from anywhere from 3 to 14 days, depending on what I'm trying to do. Now, if I'm trying to maintain a decent nitrogen level, I'm going to do that for 3 days. This way I have a lot higher nitrates and ammonia in there. If I'm trying to grow something like cannabis, peppers, or tomatoes, especially if they're well-established plants, I'm going to go ahead and do that for 12 to 14 days so I can get rid of that nitrogen, so that I have mostly phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and magnesium that are going to come out of that, and it's going to get rid of that nitrogen through the denitrification process. So adjusting your individual mineralization tanks, or having multiple mineralization tanks so that you can choose which nutrient solution you want to add on a given day, really can help you maximize the yields of your facility. That's something that is not emphasized or talked about enough. Nutrient brewing. Nutrient brewing increases microbial counts for your plants. I love to put in things like liquid IMO from Korean natural farming or other microbial inoculants into my mineralization tanks in order to improve mineralization. You can improve mineralization of fish waste by up to 85% simply by adding things like liquid IMO from Korean natural farming, which you can look up on somebody like either Matt Powers, a wonderful book on soil biology, or Chris Trump's YouTube channel, or any number of different resources that are out there. And then brewing can increase your microbial counts by as much as 2,000%, cheap and easy. Again, when you're doing mineral ppms mineralization for your aquaponic system, generally try to keep it below 1,400 total ppms. You can go 16 or 18, but much above that you're going to have some problems. So try not to get it too high. It's not the end of the world if it's above that, but you're aiming for around 1,400 parts per million. Again, mineralization, we have short cycle, long cycle. Short cycle, 2 to 3 days, more biodiversity, higher nitrogen, great for leafy greens and veg growth. Your long cycle is going to be 14 to 21 days, much less biodiversity, much lower nitrogen levels, and great for flowering crops. Here's a great diagram of what you do for mineralization. So we have a conical bottom tank. We have an air stone mounted in the bottom where the drain is for the solids. That's a blower that attaches directly to the T in the plumbing down there with the valve below it so that we can drain it later on. That we fill up with fish waste above the drain line. Then we brew it for the allotted amount of time, and then we shut off the air brewing, and you can see the fish waste anything that's left will settle down below the drain pipe, assuming you put it at the right location, and fill it up to the correct amount. This will allow the solids to separate to the bottom and allow the hypermineralized water above that's filled with wonderful microbes and minerals that are ready to supercharge your plants. And then we open that valve and it drains all of that beautiful clear liquid directly back into the system, which is filled with minerals for the plants. And then we close that valve, we top it back off with the new fish waste, and we do it again. There's a lot of misconceptions about nutrients. A lot of people think that, we have this kelp, azomite, rock dust, and it's going to fix everything. Or fish poop has everything that plants crave. It's got electrolytes. This simply is not the case. You do have to, again, supplement your system, and you have to maintain pH in the proper range, which you can see here in the diagram. You definitely want to maintain it between 6 and 6.8. For aquaponics, we generally want to keep it between 6.4 and 6.8 in order to have that maximum bioavailability of as many minerals as possible. Utilization of mineralization waste. So, after we fully mineralize all of that fish waste, and it's been mineralized 4 or 5 times as we keep topping that off, you're going to end up with some solids that build up in the bottom. You're going to have some scales and some just solid material from the fish waste that just simply doesn't want to get broken down. You can take that and put it in giant worm bins, which you can see here, and the worms will absolutely break that down into a wonderful nitrogen-rich, hyper-mineralized worm casings that is significantly better than terrestrial worm casings alone. So it can be a great additional source of revenue and a great way to supplement your soil mixes. If you have a soil garden, this is a wonderful amendment. And for a 10,000 square foot of lettuce production, you generate about 2,000 pounds of vermicompost per year per 10,000 square foot of vegetable production. So definitely, or 7,000 square feet, I'm sorry, for 7,000 square feet of production. So keep that in mind that, this can be a great way to continue to provide and expand upon your soil gardens as well on your property. Feeding soil growth with aquaponics. So on the left here, you can see soil that's been fed for 5 years with aquaponic aquaculture waste in a terrestrial soil, and then the original starting soil material from just outside the grow bed of what it looked like when they started. That is brown clay. It's not much in it. There's, you can't really grow much in it. It doesn't, it's very difficult. Whereas on the left, you have, something that looks like you just purchased it from the compost a store, So it really is a wonderful amendment, especially if you're dealing with poorer soils. Just setting up a barn and doing aquaculture and utilizing it to properly mineralize and microbially inoculate your soil beds can radically change the soil on your property, even if that's all you're doing. Even if you don't do full aquaponics and all you're doing is raising some koi in your man cave in the corner, absolutely can very much improve your property. And this is a picture from Little River Farms. They're just south of Norman, Oklahoma. It's a good friend of mine that's been doing this for a long time. You can check out videos of his farm on my YouTube channel. So monetizing excess fish waste to cannabis growers. So Fish Nor, Fish Shit, and many other different companies now are out there where they take concentrated fish waste, they brew it up like we talked about with mineralization, and then they resell it. And it can be a great amendment. It's extremely popular in most of your hydro stores. You can be the local guy that's making it, so that people often like to support the local growers, and it can be a great way to kind of get even more money from your system. Again, like we talked about, even if you just want to throw a couple of spare tanks up, you don't even want to deal with the aquaponic side of it, this can be a great, side revenue stream for you. One thing you do need to worry about if you are not properly maintaining your system is heavy metal problems. There is one company in particular that is still heavily pushing kelp and kelp extracts as the only thing you need to add as supplementation. There's another group that often suggests rock phosphate. Both of these inputs have high levels of arsenic, which you can see here in this failed heavy metals test from one of my clients in Oklahoma. I've taken over 4 separate clients from this one aquaponics company in Oklahoma that has regularly had failed customers for heavy metals in cannabis. There is nobody studying any of this in aquaponics for vegetables. I can guarantee you that there's 1 or 2 people out there that are heavily overdosing their kelp, and their lettuce probably would come up similar. But proper aquaponic system does not have these issues. This is strictly from people overdosing kelp, rock phosphate, or other heavy metal containing things like rock dust or azomite would be another one that you can get yourself into trouble with, but are often recommended for aquaponic systems by organic growers that simply don't understand the chemistry problems involved in aquaponics. So something to be very aware of and easy to avoid. Just don't overdose with kelp or other heavy metal potential inputs. If you want to be sure that you don't have any heavy metal issues, you can check out trueaquaponics.com. We have tested all of our inputs there for heavy metals. We also have nutrient dosing services. If you don't want to deal with dosing in your aquaponic system, all you simply do is send off a water sample once or twice a month, depending on which service you sign up for. We test the water for you. We do all the mineralization calculations, and we send you custom formulated nutrient packets that have a date on them. You simply tear them open, pour them into your sump tank on the date that it says to, and it automatically readjusts all the minerals in your aquaponic system and accounts for maximum yield based on your specific crop choices in your system and your current water chemistry that's going on in the last 2 to 4 weeks, depending on which service you sign up for. So we can completely drive your system remotely from a mineral standpoint of view with our service. So if you are looking for inputs or supplemental nutrients for your aquaponic system and you want to be sure they're heavy metal free, we test all of our stuff every 6 months to ensure that there are no problems with any of our suppliers, because we simply got too frustrated trying to find anyone that had these things available on a regular basis. So Roger at True Aquaponics and I joined teams and have a wonderful service to help manage people's farms. Now, things to reduce bioavailability of your nutrients. UV sterilizers are often recommended for aquaponic systems to eliminate E. coli, salmonella, and things like that. You should be using lactobacillus from Crane Natural Farming to eliminate those pathogens, not a UV sterilizer. UV sterilizers deplete the chelation of iron and manganese, things like DTPA, ETPA, and things like that, EDTA. All those chelations get broken down by UV, and what happens is the sleeves on the UV sterilizers get coated with a thin layer of iron, which blocks any of the additional UV light. So after about a month, they don't even work. Right? That quart sleeve is completely coated with a thin layer of metal, and there's not even any light penetrating the tube anymore. So they really should never be used. They also, again, completely deplete your manganese and iron in the water within a matter of days. So you can't use them. Oxidizers are the same thing. The high oxidation rates of those will immediately break down your iron and manganese for the same reasons. Ozonators and UV sterilizers are great for quarantine systems. If I just got a bunch of fish fry, if I brought in a bunch of new fish and I have them just in a separate aquaculture system that has no plants in it and we're not going to use for mineralization, they're wonderful for preventing disease on those types of situations, but they should never be used in line with an aquaponics facility, ever. And they will cause you mineral problems, and they will cause you to have all types of mineralization issues. Extreme temperatures can negatively impact plant uptake. It's also going to hurt your plants. Extreme nutrient imbalances can cause lockout, and then pH being far out of reach can also negatively impact your facility. Equipment to avoid. UV sterilizers, like we talked about, can crash your iron, manganese, and others. Auto feeders clog, they mold, and it takes 15 seconds to feed your fish. Now, if I feed my fish and the fish don't come to the surface, I know there's something wrong with my system. The nitrogen could be super high, maybe a fish died and the ammonia spiked, and it's somewhere else in the system. Maybe someone poured something in the system, if you have an asshole neighbor or something like that. Maybe your pH is off. Maybe something else, chemistry is wrong. You're going to notice that by the fish not immediately exploding the surface of the water when you feed them. So that's a good indicator that, you have a healthy system that given day, or hey, I need to spend a little bit of time investigating why the fish aren't behaving normally. MBBRs and AST filters, overpriced, and they don't work. They don't do anything. An MBBR has less than 1% of the surface area of a media bed. Even a 4x8 media bed is going to have 1,000 times more surface area than even the largest MBBR that you can purchase. AST filters never work as they're advertised. They're extremely expensive, and they often create a fine silt in the system, which is extremely difficult to get rid of, that causes all manner of pathogen issues. So avoid them. They're overpriced, they don't work, and just don't use them. Water spinners, again, another useless snake oil product. Same thing with the magnets and the energy crystals, the structured water. All of that is snake oil BS that does not work or do anything. Saponins, such as yucca extract, or even quadrilla oil, quadrilla extract, are extremely fish lethal and should never be used with fish. Yucca extract is the #1 reason I get why people kill every last single fish in their system. Everywhere from 3 to 10 times a year, I get people that are running wicking beds or dual root zones, and they're using yucca-based soil, pro mix. Some of the pro mixes have soil in it, have saponin in it. Some of the other organic soils have saponin in it as a wetting agent. And they will instantly kill every last fish in your system. A few drops of a yucca extract can kill an entire Olympic pool worth of fish. So be incredibly careful with using anything that contains saponins of any kind, with the exception of aloe vera. Aloe vera does not have fish lethal saponins. It does contain saponins, but the ones in aloe vera are not lethal in any way to fish. So be mindful of that. It is the one exception to that. And it's actually often used in things like stress coat, which you buy at the normal pet store. Just because it says it's organic doesn't mean it's fish safe. Again, lots of organic biocontrol, not biocontrols in terms of living controls, but many essential oils that are quote-unquote organic certified, or even your 25B classified pesticides. Many of those will kill your fish, so be mindful of that. And then crystal magic energy fields, again, have no place in the garden. If you want to put one on the altar of your dresser, that's fine, but keep them out of the aquaponic system. Basic aquaponic chemistry overview. So again, pH you want between 6.4 and 6.8. This is critical for bioavailability of all nutrients in your system. If you're going to dose your pH up, dose with calcium carbonate alternating with potassium silicate for the best results, either 50-50 or dosed calcium carbonate this time, next time use potassium, so on and so forth. Iron, extremely important, will be the first thing depleted in your system. You can amend these either with DTPA iron if you're using it, which is my go-to, or if it's organic certified system, you can use iron humate or iron citrate. Both of those will work for organic certified systems. Iron citrate is the less desirable of the two. Try to use iron humate if you're going to go for an organic certified system. Molybdenum, manganese are often deficient without occasional supplementation. Molybdenum is the number one thing I get when I take over a new system. 100% of the time it's at 0 or close to 0, and the plants are not doing well. They're not optimally processing nitrogen, or in the case of red lettuce or any red pigment producing crop, they have to, anything that produces anthocyanin specifically has to have molybdenum or selenium in order to create that anthocyanin compound. So if your red lettuce is not red, or your purple bok choy is not purple, it's because your molybdenum is too low. And simply supplementing that at 0.1 or 0.2 ppms, even though that's way above your traditional range, is what's going to fix that and maintain that. And aquaponics really does need an above average level of molybdenum compared to soil. Overdosing zinc is the easiest way to kill your fish with minerals. It's strictly mineral only, so don't do that. And then avoiding yucca extract, again, a few drops can kill 30,000 gallons worth of fish. pH, your potential of hydrogen, again, 6.4 to 6.8. The pH will gradually slowly drop. You should see a 0.1 to 0.2 pH drop over the course of a few days. And then also, too, your KH, or dissolved carbonate hardness, is also important. If you're seeing more than a 0.2 pH swing from daytime to nighttime, it means your dissolved carbonate hardness is too low. So keep that in mind if you're getting wonky ratings. And you should be testing your pH at a different time of day, on a regular basis. If you test it every day at 5 p.m., it might stay that right pH at every day at 5 p.m., but if you test it at 5 a.m., it might be radically different. So be sure that you're not just checking it at the same time every day when you are checking your pH. And you can even get continuous pH monitors at any pet store if you want to run them inline. For pH up, I'm a much bigger fan of doing potassium silicate and calcium carbonate now. They really provide the widest range of nutrients. The silica helps with hot and cold resistance, as well as pest resistance and mold resistance. The potassium is obviously adding potassium to the system, and the calcium carbonate's raising the alkalinity and the calcium levels of the system. So it really does provide the best, most rounded pH up dosing compared to the stuff. Now, you're typically told potassium hydroxide and calcium hydroxide. never use those. They are extremely easy to overdose with and way overshoot your stuff. Also, you can't put either one of them on an airplane. Why would I use something in a system that I'm going to eat the crops out of when I literally can't even put calcium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide and ship it through the mail? It has to be shipped ORMD, which anyone that's worked for the Postal Service knows means you're not allowed to put it on an airplane. So, these are not safe chemicals that you should be putting in your food production. Now for pH down, you want to make sure you're using lactobacillus or lactobacillic acid bacteria serum for your smaller systems, aquarium-sized systems, patio systems, and then phosphoric or muriatic acid for your larger systems or higher pH changes. So if I have, a 7.6 or 7.8 or above, we're going to use muriatic acid. If it's, 7.5 to 6.8 or so, we're going to use phosphoric acid. So it's kind of like a lowest to highest. And then don't use vinegar. It causes too many chemistry issues. Citric acid is just not strong at all. And nitric acid also adds nitrogen. So those are some other ones that are occasionally suggested for aquaponics. Here's a good example of a small little system you can make at Home Depot. This is a tough tote, a concrete mixing tray, a fountain pump, and a basic flood and drain kit that you can get at any pet store or hydro store. Dual root sown pots. Again, there's a couple of little pots in there with some soil and a little heater to keep the fish warm at night. You do get quite a bit of temperature fluctuation. And you can see there the plants are really taking off. We got beans and peppers and tomatoes and stevia and all kinds of good stuff growing in just a tiny little area. Frequent issues I see with aquaponics as a consultant: people don't understand the importance of having standardized SOPs so that all the employees are easily able to tell what to do when something goes wrong, or just what to do on a regular basis. Lack of funding when they're trying to build larger facilities and often spending more than they have. Assuming flowering crops and lettuce need the same feed rates. Again, simply not true. Thinking that you can grow commercially because people grew a couple of little plants in their basement. I get that a lot with cannabis growers. Bringing black market behavior into legal grows. That can be a huge problem depending on what exactly we're talking about. Lack of understanding of basic biology. Little to no education when it comes to crops. Lack of representation when it comes to the legal side of things. People don't spend a lot of time pheno hunting or choosing the right crops for their facility. They just kind of rush. And, a great example, I've seen plenty of people that are great lettuce growers, but, if all of your neighbors are good lettuce growers in soil already, you're not going to be able to sell that lettuce. You need to grow things that are not going to be directly competing with other people in the area. And then bugs and viral outbreaks, mosaic virus, root aphids, because they typically love water much more, the rice root aphids as well as the lily pad aphids, which you see out here in the United States, which is kind of like our version of rice root aphids, native to North America, and spider mites and thrips are the other ones. And then also people just not understanding, they're looking at septoria, which you see on the top right here. People often have facilities that are completely infected before they even realize that there's something going wrong with the facility. So these are different stuff that you see occasionally. I'm also on the board of directors for Copyleft Cultivars, who has a presentation at this conference as well. Kayla will be giving us a wonderful presentation on the different work of Copyleft, as well as our new AI tool, which we are working on to bring you guys a democratization of natural farming for soil growers and aquaponic growers alike, which you can check out his wonderful presentation later this week. Copyleft Cultivars allows you to register your particular crops in an open source way so that it cannot be exploited by corporate interests. We also have a Phyto Galaxy to help trace the history of your cultivars, as well as through the genetic testing, as well as a Patreon, which you can find us at Copyleft Cultivars and copyleftcultivars.com. They're a wonderful group of people that I'm really proud to be part of, that offer everything from free natural farming AI grow tools to help people around the world grow much more cheaply and nutrient dense, utilizing local crops in the area and local plants in order to create those fertilizers and pesticides, all on their own, using just their phone. So it really helps us do that, as well as protect a lot of these cultivars that a lot of us are so passionate about, be it cannabis or tomatoes. You got your grandma's, heirloom tomato that she brought over from the Netherlands or something back in 200 years ago. You want to make sure that Monsanto can't ever get a hold of it. You can go ahead and register it through copyleft, and then I'll protect you forever for that. And then I have our wonderful natural farming AI tool, which he's going to give a wonderful presentation on. And here's just a quick example of how it gives you customized nutrient instructions, dosing schedules, and you can even use things like, you can see here where we told it to use just crops that for the inputs that are invasive plants, right? So it's using knotweed, water hyacinth, and kudzu in order to create a nutrient fertilization plan for a 4x8 grow bed growing tomatoes and peppers. So it really allows you to do quite a few different things. And again, democratize what is otherwise an extremely complicated science, utilizing thousands of different plants from around the world, and then combining them in different ways to get the exact nutrients that are similar in parts per million to your traditional salt inputs that you would buy at the store. So we're kind of able to utilize the different plants on your property to create much better nutrient solutions. So check that out. If it's something you're interested in, you can get early access to the AI on the Patreon if you're interested. And you can find me at Growing with Fishes podcast. We have over 1,000 hours of free educational content: cannabis, living soil, aquaponics, you name it. If it's in agriculture and organic, then we cover it with the experts that are the most knowledgeable in their field on that topic. We have new episodes every week, every Thursday, and you can check it out on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube and Rumble. You can check out my Aquaponic Cannabis course at apmjclass.com. It's over a week-long intensive course where we go through every aspect of home and commercial aquaponic production of cannabis. We have videos from facilities all over the planet. We have all kinds of cool supplementary papers and photo reference guides and all kinds of different stuff in that, as well as video tours of commercial facilities and much, much more, interviews with different head growers and all kinds of different things. So it's been featured in High Times, Dope Magazine, Dude Grow Show, Growcast, Embracing Organics, Growing with My Fellow Growers, and a whole bunch of other media outlets. I also have the Aquaponic Living Soil and Pest Control course. You can find it at thepestclass.com. We have tons of amazing reference photos, all the different biocontrols that are available in North America, as well as some that are not available in North America as well. And all the different beneficial insects you might use in your garden, application rates, how to create your own biocontrols, which is something that you don't really hear about in any of the other courses. We have stuff on how to capture your own local nematodes. We have stuff on how to create your own equivalent to Vivaria bassiana with IPMO, and a whole bunch of other things that really allow people to better understand and better well-round out their pest control plans for their facilities or their gardens. So definitely check that out. It's about a day and a half, 2-day course on all things pest control. And you can find the rest of my resources at the following links. Thank you so much for your time. Feel free to email me if you have a question, or reach out to me through any of these different resources. I'm also a DEM Pure certified educator through Dragonfly Earth Medicine Pure, and I'm very proud of that as well. So thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to take any of your questions. Thanks a lot, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the conference.